So I'm Camilla Bullock, and I'm leading the Emerging Payments Association Asia. And this is the first hot topic briefing for the year, probably to no one's surprise, as we saw early in the year still. It's the fourth time we're running this session. And I tell you, it's always our prediction that comes through. So grab your pens and papers. We are delighted to have so many with you, with us on the line. And today we're just going to focus on what's ahead of us, but we might be drawing some inspiration from last year also. But 2022 was quite a turbulent year, I would say. We had the tightening of the economy, we had inflation, we had a war, and I just read a Forbes article to read up on some facts. So it was 3/4 of the listed payments companies actually slumped their share prices. But it was a return towards the end of the year. And out of those slumping prices, 3/4 of them was again trading higher than the mid-year point with 10%. And also, if we're looking at the broader economies believe in the payments sector, you actually saw new companies attracting funding 32% higher than in 2021. So it is a lot of positive things still happening, even if the turbulence most likely will continue. For APA Asia, we had a really good year, and I want to say that because to you, the community, we couldn't do what we do without you. So I'm just going to share some, why is that not up? No, I was going to share some numbers. But we've had about 43% growth in our membership. We've had growth in our advisory board and also on our ambassador side. And that is really important because we're running all those events, we're doing submissions. Last year, we had 64 events happening across the region, both in Singapore and Hong Kong and also in other countries. So we hope to see you all at one of those events next year. But of course, we'll continue doing what we do online because it's such a great opportunity to bring everyone together from across the region. So before we go in and listening to those predictions from our advisory board, I would like to introduce you to who we have with us today. We have Mai Lan from AP Plus. She's the new CEO. She has the first day at the job today. She previously represented EY. We have Andy White, who is the CEO of AusPayNet. We have Stephen Shan, who's heading up governance and corporate affairs for PayPal. Jen McGrath, who is the GM for payments and issuing at Novati. Marianne Francis, who's new to the advisory board. So welcome, Marianne. Marianne is from IBM Consulting. And we have Ken Pandit with us also, who is from FIS and looking after the whole APAC region. So we also have our policy lead, Dr. Brad Pragnell, on the line. Brad, are you here? Can I see? So he's not here yet. While we're waiting for Brad to come, I'm going to launch a poll because we also want to see what you, dear community, thinks that the payments year 2023 is going to show us what's going to happen. So let me launch that one. Launch. And as you see, all of the above of other suggestions, please feel free to drop into the chat group if you think that we have missed something. And also during this whole session, please feel free to comment and add your flavors to it. We're always keeping the chat open because we love to hear what you think. Good, it's looking good for embedded payments. Back around. There's still some coming in. Okay, so I'm going to end that and I'm going to show you the results. There. Did you see them? Yeah. Good. Then we'll see what the advisory board, if it is in line with those predictions. And please also, audience, if you could, while you're listening, please pop in whereabouts you are from, like what country. I always think that's really interesting to see where in the region you're sitting. But with further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Brad Pragnell, who's going to take the panel through the predictions.
Thank you very much, Camilla, and welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Brad Pragnell. I'm an EPA ambassador. I'm also consulting on a number of payments issues here in Australia, supporting EPA Asia on some of their policy work, as well as supporting a number of real-time deployments in South Asia and in North America. So it's good to be on the call, and like everyone, very excited to be kicking off 2023. I think Camilla has given us a good overview that coming out of 2022, it's been a pretty challenging year on a number of fronts, at least not the war in the Ukraine and the impact that's had on the global economy, continuing inflationary pressures, and imminent economic downturn, if you believe some of the predictions from various economists and central banks. So again, turbulent times ahead, but as we all know, quite often it's coming out of that turbulence that some of the best opportunities emerge. So I'm very interested in hearing from our panelists today. It's a bit of a rapid fire session. And I will be asking each person to do their 3 minutes. I'll be keeping a pretty close eye on the clock, but I think people are pretty well attuned to that. So I'll start with introducing Stephen Chan from PayPal.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for for organizing this event, Camilla and the team here. Maybe in my world, in the government and regulatory space, so I just came back from travel after Chinese New Year, so my voice is a bit coarse from the 18-hour airplane ride, so apologies, I don't have COVID, just so you know. Maybe some of the broader themes that I see emerging for APAC, and I'll leave also others to chime in as well. One is around data privacy. The other is around consumer protection, and lastly, more kind of the opportunities around ESG. On data privacy, where we can expect to see a sea change taking place in Asia Pacific. Just a few weeks ago, the Philippines National Privacy Commission just finalized and came into effect a law requiring additional data processing requirements. We are seeing significant comprehensive changes in India through the Personal Data Protection Bill, also in Vietnam with the Decree on Personal Data Protection. That's been in the work for the past few years. We also see new laws emerging in Thailand, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and also in other mature regimes. We are seeing amendments to the privacy laws in Australia, Japan, New Zealand, Singapore, all aligning to the EU laws. What the common themes around these regulations and laws are really expanding scope around extraterritorial provisions. We see additional requirements around breaches in notification, and also appointment of data privacy officers. Data localization is also a theme in some of the jurisdictions like Vietnam and China, although we're happy that India's draft bill right now has left that out. I think from a multinational company perspective, although some of these laws share core data privacy principles and obligations, the implementation and the specific rules governing some of the cross-border transfers and timetables and timelines for notifying authorities, etc., creates challenges because it lacks uniformity and make it very difficult for companies, especially MNCs, when developing global or regional privacy compliance programs. Consumer protection, I think we all have witnessed the volatility in the crypto market with the collapse of FTX and an emerging risk in some of the new fintech products. We can expect, regulators focusing on consumer protection across a number of regulatory topics, whether it's crypto, buy now, pay later, even some of the open banking area as well. We're seeing consultations and regulations coming up in Singapore, in Australia. Korea right now is considering 17 crypto-related proposals in the National Assembly, just an example. And lastly, I think ESG regulators are looking to fintech sector, and it's becoming more and more relevant for the fintech sector to develop solutions in this space. For example, I think here in Singapore, there's a lot of interest to look at blockchain technologies, for example, in helping to validate carbon credits. I think that's one area that creates a lot of challenges other areas around ESG, including financing for sustainable development. MAS launched a new ESG impact hub to drive collaboration, and also appointed a chief sustainability officer a few years back. And so we can expect increasing focus in this area for the fintech and payment sector.
Thank you, Stephen. That's great. I'm going to pass the baton to May Lam, from CIO from Australian Payments Plus. And as Camilla mentioned, I believe it's your first day today, May. Is that right?
Yeah, thanks, Red. Yes, certainly. Hi, everyone. So I'm May. I am the CIO of Australian Payment Plus. And today it is my first day. And also I just traveled back from Hong Kong to Sydney after celebrating the Lunar New Year as well. So I think carry on from Stephen, there's a lot of great points that Stephen made that I will have to agree. And maybe some of the prediction is overlap as well. So we will have seen that our world is becoming more connected. And not only from the devices perspective, but also recovering from the COVID or coming out from the pandemic, we will see more trades happening. So the world, the cross-border commerce is connected. So based on that one, we see that more innovation is needed, not just on the payments, but payment is essential to move beyond that value chains. The focus will be more on the experiences, and also simplifying the fraud and the risk management. And the third part is the data commercialization. So first of all, would be like we see more of streamlining of the authentication and the authorization. So we see the rise of the digital ID and the relevance of that, and the adoption, not only from the consumer perspective, but also merchants of leveraging that. The second one is on lowering the friction of the C2B and C2G governments, the payment friction. So instead of innovating the new payment methods, we see that more collaboration, more penetration of on harnessing what is existing. For example, account-to-account payments. In Australia, we see more penetration on the pay-to adoption. And open payments. So what I meant by that is that the cross-border, for example, the API, the more open API standard will come to play to support the open payment capability. And then the third one is that as one of the pro on the embedded payment. So we see more innovation, especially from the fintech perspective that come into the market or growing the market, leveraging that. But it's not, again, it's not on the payment itself, but it's commercializing the data, of leveraging the ecosystem, their partnership of making that startup, leveraging the AI capability to make it more seamless, moving along of the before and after payments side. So elongate the relevance of value chain. And the fourth part is that to do that, we will see the continuation, and it's really important on the collaboration of the whole ecosystem. What I meant by that is that the bank, fintech, big tech, and also the central banks, because there's a lot of innovation that is happening in the whole world and also in the Asia Pacific regions that cannot be having those conversations alone. And we'll be seeing more of a regulator and a policymaker to facilitate the conversations happening in the regions. And then the last but not least is that the blockchain, the DLT, and the Web3 innovation beyond the coins, beyond the cryptocurrencies. So as mentioned by Stephen on the ESG agenda, or even along the value chain and the experiences of the use cases that we will see that rise.
Great. Thank you very much, May. Really appreciate that. I think our next speaker now is Andy White, former colleague of mine, who is currently the CEO of AusPayNet. So take it away, Andy.
Thanks, Brad. And for those of you who've heard me do this before, I like to have a bit of fun with this. As Camilla suggested, it's a fun topic. So I was looking back to last week and we had the Oscar nominations. So my predictions for 2023 are going to be in the format of best film or TV show. I think someone's going to help me with the slides kindly. And so the first nomination that we have, assuming I get a slide up, is, I'll just continue and we'll get the slides eventually, is iRobot. Now, you may remember iRobot from the 1950s Isaac Asimov short stories, or you may remember it more recently in the 2004 film starring Will Smith. I think it's fair to say that Will Smith probably won't be invited to this year's Oscars. But the interesting question will be how many winners will use ChatGPT to write their speeches for them, as students are doing in their essays now. So this is all about AI. We've seen the hype around ChatGPT. The interesting thing about that is that at the moment it's limited to just using historical documentation rather than data. So once bots can actually utilize data, how is that going to impact payments and indeed financial services for end users? And many seasoned observers see bots and AI negotiating services for us, whether that's parking our car or negotiating with other bots on the other end about our insurance policies. And that should start to then bring what we talked about for a long time in terms of the Internet of Things and embedded finance actually to life and change retail payments and our lives. And I think, as a couple of people have already mentioned, to do that, actually supporting frameworks like open banking and digital identity will also need to become mainstream. So that's really in the embedded finance and AI camp that were our top two votes. Our second nomination is the 1985 seminal movie National Lampoon's European Vacation. That saw the infamous Griswold family face the challenges of moving across borders. So yes, we're into cross-border, which was another popular topic. And I think 2023 will be the year where we start to take cross-border payments really seriously. The Griswolds in their European vacation faced issues of speed, transparency, cost, and access. And we face exactly the same issues in cross-border payments as identified by the Financial Stability Board. And they, of course, published their roadmap back in 2020. I think 2023 is where we really see the rubber hit the road and the Financial Stability Board move from consultation and stock takes and look into implementation issues such as payment system interoperability, legal and regulatory frameworks, and cross-border data exchange and message standards. Our third nomination has been rebranded. You'll be familiar with the books by George R.R. Martin and the TV series by HBO, but I'm going to talk about Game of Phones. This talks to the rise of merchant payment acceptance on phone, or so-called tap to pay. For a long time, we've been talking about digital wallets, and that was one of the points raised, really from a consumer perspective. But here now we'll be talking about the merchant ability to accept payments on their own device. That really is a game changer for them and really shakes up merchant acquiring. As Dave Birch puts it, we move from Apple Pay to Apple Paid, and with a multitude of providers seeking to service those merchants in this way, 2023 will be the year that this goes mainstream. And then our final nomination is the 2002 film starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks, Catch Me If You Can. It tells the story of conman Frank Abagnale, and it's nominated because 2023 is the year that I really hope we get serious about scams. Countries like the UK are talking about a scam tsunami or epidemic. We all personally feel the number of scam emails and SMSs that we get, and this is the year that we need to make ourselves hard targets for scams, raise consumer awareness of scams, and work with the wider scam life cycle. So that includes telcos, ISPs, and social media companies to stop scams at source. So there you have it, your predictions for 2023. It's AI, it's cross-border payments, it's tap to pay or the Game of Phones, and it's scam mitigation. Thank you.
That was great, Andy. Really enjoyed that. Nice to see a little bit of levity there. And yes, very timely with the Oscar nominations and the Oscars coming up. So very good list there. Our next presenter is Carrie Swen from Ant. So Carrie, if I'd like to turn over to you. Carrie, are you on the line?
No, Carrie is not with us, and Nigel is also not with us.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll move on to Marianne Francis from IBM.
Greetings, everybody. Marianne Francis, IBM Consulting, IBM Payment Center. I normally sit in Cleveland, Ohio, but I am currently sitting in Toronto. I'm up here for a bunch of meetings, and just to share with everybody, it is 2:20 a.m. here. So good morning to you all. Some of the topics that you've already heard are obviously on my long list, and some of them are very, very interconnected. They really are not discrete. goals, objectives, and or hot pursuits for 2023. Sustainability and ESG is definitely risen to the top. For folks like us, IBM actually has created an entire vertical around it, and it is an extremely busy vertical with the interest that, from corporate customers. I am fortunate enough to have a truly global role. So I don't just work from a US perspective or a North American perspective, but I spend a lot of time in the APAC region, in Europe, and the Middle East as well. And they really do all blend together in some ways across the geos. It does vary in the priorities, but very much the same topics. Based on some of the comments we've already heard as far as inflation and recession and war, one of the top categories that keeps coming up as you look at all of the trends is chaos. There's just really a sense of spaghetti and a whole bunch of work going on across all of these different areas, from supply chain to talent shortages, to being able to actually find people in this space and be able to retain them so that you can plan, for the future. Cloud remains one of our top priorities. Folks are increasingly looking for operational efficiencies. Financial institutions in particular are looking for things they don't want to do anymore. We have back end and commodity types of practices in the payment space in particular. And a lot of folks are coming to us and saying, help me not do this anymore. Is there a way for me to move it off prem? Is there a way for me to pay by subscription price instead of, having to run and have empty capacity in my equipment? So there really is an interest in figuring out what they want to do, what they want to be good at, and maybe what they don't want to do anymore, what they don't necessarily want to be good at. And I'll just throw checks out there. Sorry to anybody who still loves checks, but nobody really brags anymore that they want to be good at checks. They're out there, they won't go away. There's a lot of people that says, help me, kind of take that off. And again, they're interrelated, right? Cross-border and B2B, we've already heard those, especially in this inflationary and recessionary kind of environment. Businesses have really figured out these are just too frictioned, right? We need to make cross-border and B2B payments much more seamless. There are entities like a Visa or other folks that are looking to make that happen, but there's a lot of requests in that. One of the other, and of course AI, I've heard AI a couple of times now, AI and the data that goes with it. I'd also throw privacy in there. Because of all of this exposure that we get to data, there's a lot of concern over how that data is being used and the privacy that goes with it. And one of the hottest topics that we've run into now, and again, they go together, right? You have some blockchain and DLT. Blockchain is increasingly, a technology that's better understood and better used. But you throw in some cyber and cybersecurity because that's a huge concern. And the topic that I think will be particularly hot in 23 is quantum and quantum computing, because quantum computing is what that layer of can quantum computing break the immutability of the blockchain? That's the concern in the banking and financial services space. There's actually a discussion for the United States in Congress right before Christmas that banks and financial institutions need to start taking a harder look at what quantum, the value that it can bring, and also what it can do from a security and a fraud and risk management perspective, where it can actually be used to break the immutability of and just as an interest for our folks and friends in APAC, the Australian government actually just signed a multi-million-dollar contract to actually look at quantum computing for its own transactions. So happy to share that on a little bit more. And then there's another favorite topic that's been coming up lately in the card space, and that's what they call PayFac, payment facilitation, and the ability from a merchant perspective for independent providers to step in and ease the signing up for acquirers and handling all of that work that happens to go with signing up a merchant. There's a whole new emphasis on what they call payment facilitation or PayFac that I would really like to talk more about, with maybe some of the card folks. But that's my long list of all the topics that we find our financial institutions and our businesses coming to us for.
That's great. Thank you very much, Marianne. And you definitely win the award for commitment. being up at 2:30 in the morning, and also I believe it's something brutal. The polar vortex is about to hit.
Yep. Got the
hit,
cyclone up here too. Yeah.
Yeah. So congratulations.
I
Thank
am
you very much
jealous.
for
You
joining us.
guys in APAC have the beautiful weather. So
I think it's like 22 here in Sydney
I don't want
or
to hear it.
something
Don't
like
talk
that.
about
Yeah,
it. I don't wanna
sorry.
hear it. Okay. Stop now.
No, that was great. Thank you very much, Marianne. We're going to move on to our next presenter. It's going to be Jan McGrath from Novati. So Jan.
Yeah, hi everybody, and glad to be here again and see another round of this. Really interesting and very diverse group of predictions there from everybody. So that should help you all focus, not so anybody. But I'm going to go back to last year. I worked for Novati. We're not a fintech, we're a bit beyond that now, but we're enablers of people wanting to get into the payment space. So my predictions come from working in that space with organisations who are looking to enable payments in very, very innovative ways most of the time. So that drives my thinking. I know I only look 27, but I've been in payments for about 42 years. And so is there a lot of innovation in payments? Sure, but none as much as there is these days. In the last 5 years, I've seen some of the biggest changes. And this comes from somebody who helped implement chip or drove chip implementation across the US and the rest of the world, or when the rest of the world, then US, sorry, that was backwards. And so that was probably the biggest innovation I've seen in a long time. And in the last year, a couple of years, I've seen some really, what I consider to be really simple ideas, things that we all knew, but just didn't think to do. So buy now, pay later hasn't got much of an airing today. And I work with some large buy now, pay later companies. And I've seen a lot of press in the last couple of months where people are keen to see them, get regulated and taken down or slowed down or whatever the desire is from the banking organisations to try and change that around. I don't actually see that happening. I see that they'll get regulated, and that would be fair for them to be regulated. But I think the consumer desire to use that solution is very high. If the numbers that we see, any indication, everybody loves it. Now, I don't know that I'm in the target market, but for those of you who are younger, who love it and buy into it, I think buy now, pay later's got some longevity. I don't see it going away anytime soon. I think what you will see is maybe the smaller ones will shuffle out and the stronger ones will stay fairly buoyant. I think it's going to become around about what the consumer experiences are that people want, and buy now, pay later seems to hit the spot really well. For me also, a long-time payments girl and a long-time banker, but MPP, account-to-account payments generally are a hot topic. They're going around the payment systems that we're traditionally looking at, like the card environment. We issue a lot of cards, but I can tell you now that we very rarely sell cards as the high point. They're an add-on because they're usually looking for, all the wallet developers are looking for direct payments. They're looking for MPP. Pay2, of course, when that comes around for us here in Australia. But those are the payments that are really where people are headed. It's the experience that the consumers want, and that's the payments cycle that does it the best for everybody and the cheapest for everybody. And so I think we keep watching that space. I think banks and I think the payment schemes need to keep their eye on that. Because it's got a chance to get ahead of them, and their role in all of that could become a bit of a mystery to some of them over time. It'll take a little while for them to catch back up. But definitely account-to-account payments is a high priority for us in our business. And moreover, we also do, we issued a stable coin this year at Novati. And so that's had to bring my attention to learning about that particular industry. I think more countries around the world, their central banks will become more involved in the development and the regulation and the usage of CBDCs. I think that makes sense. I think it's seen as being quite safe, and it's a viable option for cross-border payments in particular. For not only the banks, but for retailers and consumers. So I think the energy will come from not probably the banks, but it'll come from retailers, it'll come from B2B, B2C eventually type solutions where people are trying to push to find better ways to move money across borders. Internally at Novati, we have to concentrate on hiring people and upskilling staff to understand that environment and therefore make it work in the environments that we work in, the more traditional environments. We have to keep up pace with the evolution of change in this spot. It's always changing. I'm looking at Stephen saying, gosh, if you try and keep up with the regulation part, that must do your head in most days, trying to keep ahead of what's being said and what's right and what's wrong. But I think that space is becoming much more interesting. The blockchain, the central digital currencies are definitely there. I'll leave crypto away because that's just too hard to predict what will happen there. Again, they might shuffle out there and we find the strong ones are left behind. But certainly we have a focus on CBDCs, and then we also, of course, looking in that space for what we do with cross-border. Cross-border will continue to be something that we all need to find a better way to do, and some of the innovations I'm seeing are going to provide that along the way. I think cross-border payments, we're getting closer to solutions every day, and I'm looking forward to seeing some advancements in that space this year as well. And that's me. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jan. Look, I'd agree with you on quite a bit of that. And I agree. Much of my enthusiasm for the year forward is around cross-border. I do think that there's huge opportunities there. I think that regulators and industry are really starting to focus in on that as a key issue. And I think the opportunities there are going to be significant. So thank you very much for calling that one out. Our final predictor, our final panelist is Ken Pandit from FIS Global. So I'll just hand it over to him for the final prediction from our esteemed panelists.
Thanks, Brad. Kanav Pandit here. I'm based in Singapore, and I manage the banking and the payments business for FIS across Asia Pacific. FIS, as many of you know, we work with banks, financial institutions, fintechs, merchants, and capital markets firms. We've been in the business for a very long time, and it gives us sort of a very unique and a vantage point in seeing how just the adoption of innovation is happening across the financial industry, regardless of whether it's a merchant, a financial institution, up-and-coming fintech, or even in the institutional wholesale and capital markets business. I'll frame what we see and what I see as the key trends coming into 23 and what's really going to keep us and our clients busy through the year in the context of the Global Innovation Report for 2023, which we just launched last week. This is on the back of a survey that we conducted across 16 countries globally. We polled thousands of people and really touched on what we believe to be the broad sort of areas that would affect the general public, businesses, and financial institutions. And so therefore the top 5 areas were in embedded finance and embedded payments. I think it's being recognized speaker after speaker as being one where there's going to be tremendous and sustained activity. The second was on decentralized finance, ESG, which Stephen had touched on, digital currencies has come up, and finally on the metaverse, which is sort of fading away, at least at this time. And of these, if I were to zero in, certainly from in the context of what I'm seeing working with our banks, financial institutions, the fintechs we're working with, the processors that we work with, truly a lot of work that needs to happen still on embedded finance and payments, driven by open API adoption, driven by open banking initiatives across multiple markets. That is occupying a lot of mind share. I think embedded finance and embedded payments is reaching a maturity stage in that the use cases are quickly being, there are numerous use cases that are very well established now and continue to proliferate. And so we're seeing our clients extremely busy on making sure that their integration with the larger economy, with the fintechs, with enablers, with the PayFact, etc., is happening at a pace that is not hindering innovation and not hindering the adoption of embedded payments, embedded finance initiatives. The second is, and again, this is resonating, I'd say, broadly with everyone, is what's happening through the real-time payments initiatives in markets across the world. Clearly, Asia Pacific has taken the lead. Asia Pacific and money markets in APAC, whether it's India, whether it's Australia, Thailand, Singapore, etc., we've seen really now mass adoption of real-time payments. The use cases continue to increase. And I think what's going to be very critical in the second phase, if I could call it that, is the creeping over now from the pure account-to-account consumer to the consumer to business and the business to business, not just in market, in country, but use cases also for cross-border. We're seeing a lot of activity, including between processors in different markets, to be able to create those linkages and enable real-time payments across currencies, across different markets. And so that's another area where a lot of our clients and we as well are very focused on making sure that we're supporting and driving technology initiatives. And that continues to have a lot of mind share as well. Third is really the modernization and the enablement of alternative payment methods in working with banks, in working with very large merchants. The ever-increasing use of alternative payment methods poses both a tremendous opportunity and also in some ways it's a problem statement, especially on the financial institution side, where the modernization of legacy infrastructure is very much still a thing. And so, it's no surprise for the audience here, as well as the panelists, to know that every bank, right from the tier 1, tier 2, and the smallest banks, they're putting in a tremendous amount of energy investment into modernizing their systems to be able to really deliver to the surges in transaction volumes, the products, the use cases coming from real-time and embedded and open payment adoption, and to be able to enable that at merchant, to be able to enable that across the channels that they're supporting today. Digital currency adoption continues to keep us busy. We have participated in CBDC pilots in some countries with very encouraging results. I don't think a single week goes by without press coverage of yet another regulator or country looking at piloting or trying to advance a CBDC initiative, which is tremendously encouraging. I think there is general consensus now that one area where there is tremendous value for the use of CBDCs is in the area of cross-border payments. The largest remittance corridors, I think, will be the first adopters and are going to take this, the usage of CBDCs into maturity. And finally, is the emergence of and the criticality of ESG in financial technology. And so the definition adoption of standards, the ability to capture data, reporting and compliance, all of it through potentially the use of blockchain will be very critical. And that will take increasing relevance and importance, going into this year and next year as well. And I think Stephen mentioned that. And we're certainly seeing a lot of activity and focus on ESG. I would be remiss to not mention, as has been covered, fraud and risk continues to, for all the right reason, get attention, get investment, is because the nature of the threats and the risk to the financial systems continues to evolve. And certainly we're working with a number of clients across the region to be able to advance the capabilities on monitoring for fraud, on preventing fraud. What used to be very traditional, going back to only covering for card fraud or origination fraud, now has to also serve, and cater to increasing use of social engineering and fraud, which is supported by real-time payment systems, where the ability to really stop before the fact is quite difficult. And so these would be the key areas I think are going to be very, very important and continue to see a lot of activity going into 23. Back to you, Brad.
Thank you very much, Kanav. And I know we've got a few questions, but we are on a pretty tight schedule. So I suggest anyone who has questions to feel free. We've got this recording. we're going to try to follow up afterwards on some of these things and see if we can get responses from the panelists offline. So thank you very much for those of you who've been sending through questions. We're now going to move to our next session of the event, and Camilla has asked me to talk a little bit about the EPA Asia policy agenda for 2023. So EPA Asia, as Camilla has mentioned, has been a very busy year for us. We've had a very busy year in 2022, and we're looking at 23 being just as busy of a year. As she mentioned, we did a number of white papers, events, and submissions, and we've been very active in a number of markets, Singapore, Australia, Hong Kong, and also trying to engage on a regional basis as well. We get member participation through a number of forums, these kinds of events, the advisory board that many of the people on our panel are members of, working groups, local task force, and so forth. So if you are an EPA Asia member, please feel free to reach out to the team, and always looking at opportunities to get people involved. If you're not a member, then we'd love you to join. So it's a great way to network, a great way to learn and to influence and to be impactful in this exciting industry in the very, definitely the most dynamic region. So getting on to a little bit more of the content here in terms of what we're doing. For us, really, we've got what we're calling our North Stars. So what we want to achieve is payments that are fast, simple, safe, and cost-effective for end users. We really believe that payments should be as easy as a telephone call, email, or instant messaging. That includes both in-country, and it also includes cross-border. We believe that payment systems need to be open, accessible, and feature-rich, and that the ecosystem needs to be one that promotes innovation and competition. We believe that this can be achieved through a number of things: inclusive governance of shared systems, interoperability between providers and the systems they use, level playing fields within jurisdictions, particularly around regulatory issues, the harmonization of regulation across jurisdictions, and defining and promoting shared best practice. So really, those are the types of sort of North Stars and themes that we're going to be addressing or seeking to address in 2023. So what about more specifically? Well, the types of areas that we're going to be working on are many of those that have been touched upon by our panelists. So obviously CBDCs and crypto, we're interested in that, both in terms of central bank activities, in terms of exploring them, but also in terms of their regulation and the development of markets around this. In-country regulation and licensing are very important issues around the whole regulatory stream, consumer protection around issues such as crypto. We had the mention from Jan around buy now, pay later. And again, you know, there's some adjacencies there with payments, but again, it is an important area and something that we are definitely keeping a close eye on as well. One of the new areas that we're looking at is the taxation of digital services, and we've got a little bit of a watching brief of that, and we will be responding through local networks if that does become a bit of an issue. One thing I didn't mention around infrastructure is really around issues such as real-time and QR code. So again, looking at those developments, looking at what's happening in particular jurisdictions, but also looking at it in ways in which regional, both bilateral and multilateral arrangements can be created. Lastly, around the data stream, we're interested in the whole area of open data. You know, Camilla will talk a little, might mention if she has a bit of a chance at the end, some of the work that we're doing around open data and some of the events that we have coming up around that. We're also interested in a related sense around the issue of data localization. I think there's been some concern expressed amongst the membership that data localization could impact adversely the ability to do cross-border payments and innovation and competition. And then lastly, looking at issues around anti-money laundering, counterterrorism finance, and sanction screening, and looking at those issues more closely going forward. We will continue to engage externally with central banks, regional bodies such as the through APAC and the BIS, working closely with National Association partners. AusPayNet on the call here, we have a very good relationship with them, but also other bodies such as Singapore FinTech Association and FinTech Australia. We have good relations with, and we'll continue to deepen those. And being involved in critical industry forums. Singapore FinTech Festival is becoming sort of the premier regional event, and it's something that we will definitely be maintaining a presence at. I think then lastly, in terms of the things that we'll be doing, we'll be continuing to do our submissions, white papers, research papers, and the like. So, keep your eye out on stuff coming out throughout 2023. And importantly, we're really going to be measuring our impact. So in terms of what we've been discussing at the advisory board level, really looking at it in terms of our ability to build ecosystem support through our membership. Secondly, deepening engagement with policymakers. And then thirdly, and most importantly, bringing about effective change. So progress on industry initiatives and achieving real regulatory change. So that's sort of a bit of a summary of our policy agenda for 2023, and look forward to getting you involved. I believe Danelle put something in the chat as our general manager, someone you can contact if you're interested in membership or you're interested as a member getting more involved. I think that's about it for me. I'm now going to hand back to Camilla, and I believe she's going to present the Sage of the Year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I also have to say thank you, Brad. Thank you, Advisory Board. I love those calls because I get so excited of everything we can do, especially hearing those predictions and forecasts. And I appreciate the always positive. And yeah, I just get excited to see what this year will hold for us. And when we looked to find the Sage of the Year, going through the recordings several times, transcripting, sharing it with people, some of the predictions were similar to this year. Some of predictions didn't come through, like, for example, the regulation of buy now, pay later, and some big prediction we didn't get, like the crypto winter, for example. But the Sage of the Year got many of the topics right, and particularly collaboration between regulators and investment and infrastructure related to real-time payments cross-border, and was almost looking at that MOU and the bilateral agreement that was announced late in the year. This Sage also talked about ESG and how that was coming on to the map more and being mentioned. And it's something that's coming up in so many of our calls. So we appreciated that prediction. And this Sage also talked about invisible payments. So I'm going to now announce who the Sage is. It is May Lam. I also want to say that she voted with her feet, I think, in the way of going over to the role at APP. And we hope to see lots of cross-border real-time payments now, May. Would you like to say a few words?
Oh, thank you. Didn't expect that. Thank you. Yeah, so, but it's great to see that the prediction is coming to truth in some ways, and all this innovation are most needed to continue to foster the payment in the regions for everyone to thrive. So looking forward to 2023. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. And on the theme of cross-border payments, next week we're hosting the APAC FinTech Payments Forum, which is a collaboration with 10 FinTech associations, and we're going to hear from 5 FinTech associations and also 5 local domestic schemes, including Indonesia Central Bank, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore Nets, and the Bank of Thailand. So I think that Dan is popping the link in there. So as a thank you for all of you showing up today, we're sharing this invite. So please, it's my Alexa is talking in the background. So all of you would love to see you next week. We think that the focus around real-time cross-border is something important, including all the other topics we covered today. So please stay in touch, and thank you, Advisory Board. We couldn't do our work without you. And thank you, community, for showing up. We couldn't do what we do without you. That's all for today.